Welcome to Tea and Teaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. I'm Arth Moore, and it's just me today. There is no Mike Harrowell. He is busy working in schools, doing important things. But don't worry, it's not just me talking today. I am talking with Andrew Swanson from the BBC, and we are going to be talking about the other side of the story, which is part of BBC Teaches process to help students learn about misinformation, disinformation, and fake news. It's an awesome website, and we're going to be talking to Andrew about the resources that they offer, why they created them, how they created them, and what we can do as teachers to help our young people find out what is fake news, disinformation, and misinformation. So go put the kettle on, and when we're back, we'll be talking to Andrew. Welcome back to Tea and Teaching. We are joined today by Andrew Swanson from the BBC, the other side of the story. Andrew, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me.
No, our absolute pleasure. Do you want to give us a quick background into who you are for our listeners who don't know?
Yeah, so I am currently an executive producer with BBC Bite Size. I look after a range of projects for the kind of teenage audience around non-curriculum subjects, so bite-sized careers, study support, which is everything that goes around school about kind of best ways to revise and also kind of well-being elements, and the other side of the story, which is a media literacy project aimed at trying to get young people more critical and curious about where the information, this vast swathe of information that they see and share on social media on a daily basis, is coming from.
I think it's a topic that all teachers and all educators listening to will be like, we're aware of kind of this world of fake news, but also how it's kind of coming through to our young people in their world, whether that's online or chatting or TikTok or whatever. So like what was the point behind setting up the other side of the story? Like what was the kind of the mission statement?
Yeah, I think it's what we've tried to do since the very start is make it very kind of data driven. We've tried to listen to both teachers and students about what their experiences are. When we first launched, we ran a big survey of 11 to 16-year-olds about their experiences and understanding of news and the media that gave us lots of interesting insights. One that comes to mind is the kind of high percentage of young people that thought opinions were just as valid as facts. And there was various other things in that. We've also done some internal research with teachers and with students about how important it is for them in the classroom. So 80% of young people think it's important to know about the world around them, which is really encouraging. Less than half trust any of the kind of news that is out there. Teachers as well, kind of high percentage, above 90%, really concerned about their students' susceptibility to fake news and misinformation, and also telling us that they are not as equipped as they would be with kind of those original and core curriculum subjects to kind of deliver this. So what we've tried to do with the other side of the story and media literacy page on BBC Teach is bring all of those things into one place to give teachers an opportunity to kind of pick and choose. There's videos, there's quizzes, there's things you can do as kind of lesson starters or informed time, or fuller lessons, 6 kind of media literacy starter lessons that have been designed for us by a teacher that cover lots of aspects of that. And then there's some more in-depth and kind of immersive workshops that teachers can get involved in. They're available at if you Google BBC Teach Media Literacy, they'll come up. But I guess more broadly, the answer to that question as well is that this stuff isn't going away. That this kind of new world that students are growing up in that scares the life out of us as teachers, as parents, is because it's really different to what we experienced where opinions are polarized and extremes get angrier and angrier, and there's all kinds of information and misinformation on social media. That isn't a new world to them. That's just the world. Normality is what's in front of their face, isn't it? So it's just really trying to help them have the tools to, as I said, be more critical and curious about what they're seeing and sharing, and think, actually, that thing is coming from this perspective and it's trying to make me think that, or the reason I keep seeing these things is because I'm in this kind of algorithmic echo chamber and it's reinforcing my bias and conscious bias, and we all have them, and that's totally fine, but it's just being more aware of the fact that that's influencing how you see the things that are happening around the world.
That stat you said about 80% want to learn about the world, but less than 50% kind of trust the kind of respected news sites where to go to. Isn't that really interesting? It's like, this is not young people disengaging with kind of learning. It's not them disengaging with information. It's just they have so many choices of where to go to get that information that the hard, and we find this hard as adults, like, is to discern what's good information and what's bad information. I'm sure there's a better term, but invalid information, valid kind of journalism. And like, we're talking about young people today, Andrew, and we'll keep talking about young people, but as adults, this is just a problem like for society in general.
Absolutely. So, and I think there's loads of things that we've done in the content that we've made, in the lessons that we've produced, where whilst our target audience is that secondary school age student, they're definitely applicable to adults. And as I said, the world's changing around us, and is very different. And I don't think adults are all knowing or immune to any of this stuff either. I think to your point there as well about those traditional or kind of trusted news outlets as well, I think that where I certainly grew up in a world where it was more obvious what they were. You had 4 or 5 TV channels and you turned one of them on and there was somebody who'd gone through various levels of journalism training telling you what was happening in a place. That quite often young people can't or don't differentiate between that and a guy sat on TikTok behind a green screen telling you that London's going to flood because it's rained heavily over the last few weeks and months. So it's really kind of making them aware as well of the difference between kind of, I guess, vigilante journalism and kind of that kind of more thought out and kind of considered approach to things.
And we live in a world where anyone, let's give him a name of Arthmore, can just randomly set up an educational podcast with his friend Mike Harrowell, give it a logo, give it a name, and then say a thing that this is information that you should be listening to. Obviously, this is information you should be listening to, but just making the point that it's very easy for kind of anyone to get their word out there. So let's not go off into the world of adults, because we've got BBC Verify and we've got amazing websites such as that. So if we really talk about young people, Andrew, like, you've spoken to teachers and educators, and you mentioned that teachers just don't feel equipped to kind of have those conversations or how to challenge their students. Now you've kind of produced this content and you've spoken to these teachers. What are you finding are the key kind of things, the key information you want to be given to teachers in order to help them tackle this problem?
I think one of the approaches has been, I used to be to work on Newsround, which is obviously for younger end of the audience, that kind of 6 to 12-year-olds. But we always had a kind of phrase on Newsround that was never underestimate the audience's intelligence, but never overestimate their knowledge. And I think the same principle is applied in a lot of this. Of, we are trying to take media literacy, news consumption, the awareness of things like sorted bias, confirmation bias, unconscious bias, back to kind of the basics of those concepts, and not assume that the audience know what those are or that they are conscious of them happening, and then start to build through those kind of concepts, practical examples of how kind of they play out with the kind of news that young people engage with. And it's interesting that stat that you mentioned, before. I think one of the things that comes back from a lot of the research as well is that young people are actually interested in news, but what they think is news, they think it's politics and kind of select committees and various other things, whereas actually one of the lessons we go through, right, there's a whole range of things that can be news, from the Prime Minister announcing a new housing policy to somebody finding a picture of Shrek in their curry or whatever it might be, and that actually on
It's
this
always Shrek in the curry, isn't it? It's always Shrek in the curry. Or Jesus on toast. They're the
yeah,
two I always
yeah.
found.
But actually, they're really working hard, and what we've done in the lessons is to use examples that have proved popular with that audience, that are about things that they care about, that they're interested in, but also showing them through what might seem like more flippant things, that actually this is maybe laughable or funny if it's relating to something that's quite light, but actually the ways that your views and kind of opinions are being manipulated and affected by some of this stuff, if you apply that to more serious things, the consequences can be more severe.
It's really interesting you said that, Andrew. I was recording a pod this week, which I'm not sure is out yet, with the school consent project, which teaches young people about consent. And they, in a very similar way to what you're saying, they have those conversations at the start in a non-sexual context. They talk about whether you have consent to do this, do that, and then they start to develop those skills in other scenarios. And that's what you're saying. It's about training these skills for people, young people, to be able to recognize what might be fake news, what might be disinformation, where to go, and then they can apply those skills to a whole range of contexts, from is Shrek really in my curry to what is Rishi Sunak really saying, are the stats he is giving is true. And that's what I love about the other side of stories. It takes the skill and then allows you to kind of apply it elsewhere. There's one great video about the history of fake news, which kind of comes at it from a bit of a jovial angle, and then it's suddenly like, right, bang, now let's flip this into something that's really serious. And that's what I really like. Is there, like, so when you're producing this content, creating this content, is there like this, have you seen that skill that stood out, that the teachers or the videos are saying, students watch out for this, that you're like, I wish every teacher, I wish every adult knew to help their young people with this?
There's a lot in it.
There's a lot, yeah.
And there's a lot to unpack, and I think it's one of those, when we first started, we had a session in a room and there was four of us, and we'd looked into a lot of the research on this, and a lot of the kind of things that the government had flagged that were important, and various other bits. And we're like, every kind of rock you lifted up, there was a whole range of other things underneath it that you could go into. I think one of the things we decided, and it relates slightly to what you were saying there, very early on, and we did some kind of pilot sessions with schools in different parts of the country and tried to kind of test things out. One of the things we decided very early on was that what we wanted to give students was kind of tools and not rules. If we stood in front of them and said, don't do this, don't ever share this, don't ever look at this kind of thing, or don't read this kind of thing, then it just washes over them a little bit. But actually thinking about giving them the tools to think, and again, applicable to adults, but I might well get that funny gif or that funny kind of take on something that's happening and forward it on, but do that in the full knowledge that that's one person's opinion, or that's a kind of funny take and a bit of misinformation, rather than fully believing it. So within the lessons and within the workshops, how we try to do that is by making it more immersive, more kind of applicable to their world. So rather than just sit there and have a kind of, this is the dictionary definition of fake news, and this is the history of it since 1912 or whatever it would be, we're actually getting them to do things where they hopefully have those kind of eureka moments of, right, I see how that is different to that. I see how opinions different from facts on that issue. I see how that is based on my own unconscious bias. I see the reason why that appeals is because there's an element of confirmation bias where I want that to be true, and I'm less likely to look at an alternative viewpoint. So there's loads of exercises in those lessons in particular that are on BBC Teach that are designed to get them thinking about some of that stuff. And again, to your point, kind of going from flippant stuff to things that are more important. So one of the ones around kind of confirmation biases, controversially, we start that lesson by asking them who's funnier, girls or boys, and they have to kind of say what their starting opinion is, and then as the lesson goes on, we dig into what the kind of unconscious bias is that forms that opinion, and then kind of get them to discuss with somebody of a different view where they're coming from, and actually kind of, and then you can apply that to right whatever kind of meatier and more newsy subjects you might want to talk about, and the same principles apply, as you said.
It's really interesting listening to you, Andrew, because what I keep coming back to kind of in my head as you're talking is when I teach stuff like, let's take trigonometry as an example. Quite often students will have what we call misconceptions, something that they have got that is wrong about this topic. And it's really hard to overcome those misconceptions, and we kind of take it back. And all teachers listening to this will do that all the time. And what you're talking about, these skills that you're talking about right there, there's no difference from what I'm teaching trigonometry, but I'm just teaching it with something that has kind of this big name of fake news. We're teaching students to kind of recognize something they've got wrong, kind of go back, challenge their own pre-assumptions before they kind of go back and learn about the topic. And I really like what you said about like we all kind of share these gifts or these stories, like we all do that, like we all gossip. No, we shouldn't, but we all do gossip, and it's okay to do that. It's kind of human nature, as long as what you're saying is we kind of acknowledge that as part of the process. So it's okay for a student to kind of, it's not they should never ever click on a clickbait story ever, but they should click on it in the full knowledge of this story is a clickbait and it's making me click on it, so the story might not be a genuine story.
And then also the knock-on consequence of that is once you've clicked on that algorithmically, you're much more likely to then get more of the same things, which can start to make you think that what's coming out of that is what the whole world thinks, rather than just the things that are being fed to you. And again, I think we don't underestimate how much young people just think that what's being presented to them is a fully rounded view, and not kind of these specifics that are kind of being fed to them that really kind of can change and alter and really distort the view of the world and certain subjects as well. And I think you're totally right on the applicability to other subjects as well. I mean, obviously there's a direct link to kind of citizenship and the role of the media, from a curriculum point of view, to English and the kind of spoken language. And what we try to do in the lessons is really get them to think about this stuff, but also kind of present arguments, present news stories, and present kind of these debates. And there's aspects of it that fit in with PSHE, but I think you're right, that kind of critical thinking element is really applicable, and the challenging of kind of assumptions and starting biases is really applicable across the board to lots of subjects as well.
And also acknowledging like what we would call in teaching like the curse of knowledge. Like as adults, and I'm going to say as teachers, we have we're kind of been brought up and trained to understand certain types of news and stuff like that. And sometimes we forget that our young people like don't have that training. Like I've got a 4-year-old, like he loves reading about dinosaurs. I could put anything in front of him as a story about dinosaurs, and he would go, well, therefore this is true.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and because he hasn't got that kind of training. So it's really interesting what you're saying. It's taking it back to, you said tools, not rules, of like giving the students the tools and they're able to do this. I'm wondering, like, so you, like the other side of the story has been right now, like what's the feedback been like from teachers and people you've been working with and heard back from?
Yeah, so really good, really valued. So we have run. So there's two elements to it. There's the content that we put out on direct to students on the Bite Size website, which is bbc.co.uk/other side of the story, or if you just Google BBC Other Side of the Story, it comes up. And that is a combination of these kind of pieces that explain some of those founding principles, and also what we've tried to do in the last year is put those through the prism of kind of events and things that are happening. There's loads of quizzes on there that have proved really popular with the audience. There's an AI or real monthly quiz. There's a fake news of the month quiz, and we've just launched a new 60-second headline quiz where you have to kind of decide which celebrity the headlines are about. And that's designed to just get them more interested in the kind of the things that are happening in the world and a bit more curious about how the things that they're seeing relate to the actual news. The other element of it is we've done workshops and then these lessons. So we based on loads of the data that we looked at when we started, there are various bits of information and stats about how important this is across the board, but how much more important it is for kids from kind of lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And in those areas, there's some Ofcom stats that show that kids from those backgrounds are generally twice as likely to believe what they see on social media without questioning it, and half as likely to come to reputable news outlets to kind of check that information. So we've done workshops in schools last school year and this school year, where we've gone in and done a mix of kind of practical and theory. Again, a lot of this immersive learning, and the feedback from that has been really good. Kind of from various starting points. I think kind of 8 out of 10 kids who we've spoken to feel like they've got a better understanding of what fake news is and misinformation. There is teachers have said how much it's helped, to your earlier point, with other elements of the curriculum, and young people also increasingly from those workshops much more interested in future careers in media, and thinking about how they can tell the stories. We did a bit of a feedback film from the various schools across the UK that we've done the workshops in, and one of my favourite lines, there's two really good bits in it. There's lots of really good bits, but there's one where a kid says, "I knew there was fake news on TikTok, but I had no idea there was that much." And then there's a kid at the end saying, "Having done this, I really think I could be the kind of person that could tell these stories to other people, and kind of I could see myself sharing news and helping people." And I think that's the aim of it, is to make them aware on a base level of how this stuff can influence their lives on a daily basis, but also hopefully inspire them to think, actually, I can be an agent for kind of positive change in this field, whether that's just in terms of daily behaviour and their approach, or for a certain amount of them to kind of go on and really try and make a difference through different kind of journalism careers.
I was going to say that must be a lovely kind of consequence of what you're doing, hearing students kind of engaging with journalism, because so much of what they hear and so much of what we hear as adults is all journalists are X, Y, Z. All journalism is awful. And like that is so far from the truth. And it's really nice for students to go like, here's some really good journalism. Here's how you can engage with it. The quizzes are brilliant. I love, like, as you said, there's one that's real or AI. And again, it's such a good thing to do with your class, everyone who's listening, such a good thing to do in form time, whatever, and just see what they can spot. And even if you just did that quiz and then left it, students are going to be questioning what they see. The quizzes are really nice kind of introduction to the other side of the story. I really like that.
Yeah, great. But yeah, I think you're right, and I think that one of the consequences of the rise of fake news and misinformation and disinformation is this kind of blanket view that, oh well, you can't trust any of them, and kind of really annoys me. And most of the things that we put up, particularly on social media, there is always at least one comment that's like, "Oh, BBC talked about fake news. That's ironic," which really annoys me because I started out as a newspaper journalist. I worked for kind of a lot of the tabloid newspapers, and if people knew the level of training and check and thought that goes into BBC reporting, and the standards that we have to meet to be able to kind of kind of verify a story and talk about it, then they'd be shocked, I think. But I think people see singular bits of coverage and think, well, they're only talking about this, so they must be biased. Whereas actually, we're trying to offer that balanced view across the piece and challenge certain interviewees on subjects by offering the other side of the story and the alternative view, but not necessarily endorsing those views.
Well, the BBC is all about inform, educate, and entertain, isn't it? And I think the other side of the story is a lovely kind of covers all those. It's educating our young people and giving them the tools that they need. It's informing them on how to spot this information and this disinformation. And it is also entertaining, which is always a good thing to kind of engage everyone with it. No, I'm just a massive fan of what, like, we talk about biased. I am massively pro BBC, and I should put that out. I think the BBC is the greatest thing in the world. If you want to hear more about kind of, there's so much disinformation stories, go on to BBC Verify as an adult, go and listen to some of the podcasts. There's so much podcast like the Understanding series, just giving you that basic information, or go and listen to The Coming Storm, which I always shout out, Andrew, because I think it's the greatest podcast series of all time. But then with our young people in our schools, we've got stuff like BBC Teach and the other side of the story. So people are listening to this, Andrew, they're like, yes, I need to learn more about this. I want to do these videos. I want to even hear more, maybe more about these workshops. What do they do? Where do they go? What do they type in?
Yeah, so for teachers, if you search for Google BBC Teach Media Literacy, there is a page there now where we have tried to bring everything together. So one of the bits of feedback we got from our research was it wasn't necessarily clear with all these different resources how to use them or where they were. So if you go on that page, there are 6 kind of media literacy lesson starters there ready to kind of plug in and go. The downloadable PowerPoints that you can just kind of, if you wanted to, kind of pull out a minute before the lesson starts, and there's teacher notes at the bottom, and you can work your way through those. The original idea was that you could do them over the course of a half term, but they're also usable as individual lessons or at your own kind of pace. Or if you think your class know a certain amount about a certain subject, but need some more kind of encouraging in others, you can pick and choose from that. I might have mentioned that they were designed for us by a teacher with kind of 15 years experience working in London and Manchester, who also previously worked in the media. So we've really tried to put in those some of the kind of lesson structures that teachers will be used to as well, in terms of reinforcing some of the points. There's also just a full range of short videos and activities, quizzes that you could use in form time as lesson start, as a stimulus for other things. If you're looking for particular kind of takes on news stories, we've got Ros Adkins explainers on that page as well. So if you wanted to look at a particular news story and the kind of what's gone into the reporting and the understanding of that. And then if you've got those students that feel really engaged and want to take those skills to another level, we also have the Young Reporter resources and information on how you can apply to the Young Reporter competition and start to tell your own stories as well. There is also the workshops are available on that BBC Teach page. They're the ones we do in schools. If you have the capacity and the resources to do those, they're available for you. If you don't and you think we'd love to do them, but we need a bit of help, you can kind of get in touch, and we will try our best to come out and do those bespoke for you. And all of those things are aimed at being usable for schools and for teachers with the full range of kind of technological capabilities at their behest. So whether you've got iPads and things that the class can use, or whether you've just literally can just do it verbally, they're available. The other side of that is on BBC Bite Size, direct to students. There's loads of things on bbc.co.uk, other side of the story, or if you just Google BBC other side of the story, that are designed to kind of help students understand that stuff, but also kind of teachers can dip in and use those as kind of stimulus and lesson enhancers as well.
So I think we're hearing there is quite a bit of stuff, Andrew, and it is all good stuff. If you're like teachers, if you're listening, like I'm really not sure, like kind of gets thing, I just go on and do one of the quizzes with my class, or the videos I mentioned, the history of fake news. I think is a lovely introduction to it. But the quizzes are the great, the artificial or real. I think it's AI or real or something like that is absolutely brilliant. Andrew, just before we say goodbye, I did mention before pod I was going to ask you, what's your favorite ever bit of fake news or conspiracy theory or disinformation? I'll give mine afterwards, but what have you managed to think of one?
Don't see. I'm probably fully in the mindset now of just how harmful this stuff can be. So it's probably not favorite in the sense of kind of
Maybe favorite. Yeah, favorite was the wrong word.
but
I don't know what the word
yeah.
is actually.
So one of the things that happened quite early on when I was in the kind of formation stage of this project was that my daughter came home from school, and we got an email from the school saying that there was a story doing the rounds that was causing a great amount of distress to a significant amount of students about the fact that London was going to be flooded because of the rise in global temperatures and the current kind of high levels of rain that we've been had, and this had been forwarded on and shared, and there was a genuine fear. There was kids in that class kind of crying at the thought of kind of this happening, and it was all a video of this guy in front of a green screen made to look like he was some kind of official news reporter, but it was all just kind of completely made up. That for me really kind of pinpointed a lot of the stuff we've talked about of how in a young person's world they don't know that is made up. They don't know that guy doesn't have any legitimacy or hasn't looked into that, or and they don't understand why somebody would just make that kind of thing up. So that for me was a real kind of reminder of right, this is why we're doing this stuff, because there's a lot of kind of harmful stuff. And again, to the earlier point, it's not about making sure that those things never happen. It's just about making sure that when they're received, that the young people can think, do you know what? Actually, I'm going to have a look into this and find out my own information and kind of check how reliable that source is.
I had one where my son came home from school. My son is 4, so maybe a very different experience, and came home and said his friend had been bitten by a bee. And I said, Jasper, do you mean stung by a bee? And he was like, nope, he was bitten by a bee. And we had quite a long discussion about whether you can be bitten by a bee or did he mean stung. And he was adamant that he had been told that his friend had been bitten by a bee, therefore his friend had been bitten by a bee, and it did not matter what I say. And I still don't know if he's, and I'm still thinking, can you be bitten by a bee? But like, is that right? I don't know. I
It's
always
an interesting kind of take, that, because I think there's something in that about a lot of fake news and misinformation. Of if somebody tells you something, even a 4-year-old, with great authority and assertion, there's a human tendency to think, oh well, they must be right. They seem really certain about this.
like, why am I googling like can bees bite me? Like I've never even considered it before, but my son has said it to me, therefore I need to look into it.
Mhm.
I also end on Andrew. There was a school I worked in where it was a drive, and every day we drove past, and on the bridge, in big bold graffiti was "The Earth is flat." And I saw that every day for about 6 months as I drove to work. So I always find flat earth theory a very interesting one to go and not learn about, but just interesting as kind of that kind of where disinformation can kind of lead you. Andrew, it's been it's just been a real pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for coming on Tea and Teaching.
Thanks a lot for having me. And yeah, if teachers listening want any of that information, then as I say, it's available. If you Google BBC Teach Media Literacy or go to bbc.co.uk/other side of the story, and they can have an explore, and hopefully we'll find this stuff useful in the classroom.
And teachers, please do, because the resources on there are absolutely brilliant. Andrew, thank you so much for your time. Listeners, I'll be back in a moment.
You're listening to Tea and Teaching with me, Lekha Sharma. I hope you're enjoying today's episode. Why not leave a review or continue the chat on Twitter @TandTeaching. Now let's get back to the chat.
Welcome back to Tea and Teaching. So just to round off the episode there, just a couple of thoughts, mate. I absolutely love so much of what the BBC Other Side of the Story does. Please genuinely go and check out that website because it's great. The line that's really got me thinking was the line from Andrew where he said when he was working with Newsround, kind of the thing they were always talking about is never underestimate the audience's intelligence, but never overestimate their knowledge. And I think that is so applicable to so much of what we do in schools. And that's definitely something I'm taking away from this. He also spoke about specifically to do with misinformation, about giving students tools rather than rules to go and kind of onus themselves. I think that was brilliant. But thank you so much to Andrew for his time. Thank you for the BBC. Please go out and check out the resources. All the information will be in the episode notes. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Tea and Teaching.
If you've enjoyed the content of this episode, please feel free to share it with other educators.
And if you're able to, please leave a review on the platform.
And as always, thank you for listening to Tea and Teaching.